Hey, folks. Our sponsors today are, first of all, they're both sponsors you've heard in the past, and we are very grateful they have decided to come on a little longer in the contract, which is awesome. That means they believe in the product. But it's Realtor Extraordinaire with Keller Williams here in the Chattanooga, North Georgia area. Lori Monteith, or as they are known on Facebook and on the web, Team Monteith. I know this. Lori started the business. She got in the real estate industry back in 08, 09, somewhere around there. Back when the real estate market, everybody was getting out. She got into it. She made it work, and she's grown her team. The reason I like that is because if you make it during the hard times, right, then you've built business the right way. So check out Lori Monteith. Their website is findchattanoogarealestate.com. Findchattanoogarealestate.com. Just go to Facebook under Team Monteith, Montieth, or call her 423-503-2450. Also, another sponsor you've heard of before and has decided to stay around for a while, JB Millworks. They can save you prices on interior and exterior doors, sun-clad windows, stair parts. So their closeout center, if you've never been there, they're in Ringo, Georgia, and they have doors galore. If you're needing a door, trust me, you're going to want to go see the stuff they have there. They have custom parts. They do installation. They've been in business forever. They are relationship-oriented folks. So if you have a project, whether it's a remodel or a new construction, whether it's commercial or residential, give Jeremy Price and his folks a shot at least talking to you. Because what you'll find is he doesn't come in telling you what he can do. He's going to come in asking you questions, finding out what you need. He's going to meet those needs, and what you'll end up doing is doing business with him a long, long time. Our friend at jbmillworks.com, jbmillworks.com, or give Jeremy a call at 706-965-6940. Lori Monteith, JB Millworks, sponsors of today's episode. Thank you very much. How many times have you heard a radio host say, I wish our listeners could have heard the conversation I had with our guest during the break? I've heard it and said it many times over the years. That is where this podcast was born. We'll go in deeper with our guests to find out more about them and learn life lessons from some influential people. Thanks for listening. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe and share, as well as rate and review the podcast on iTunes. I'm Clint Powell. This is During the Break. Let's do it. Welcome to During the Break podcast with Clint Powell. Thank you for finding us. Thank you for listening. We hope you share it, review it, do all the things that selfishly help us grow this relatively new podcast. Every week, I do a couple of podcasts. I do a short mini podcast on Tuesdays where I'll do a rant about politics, or it's about some struggles that I may have had in the past. Sometimes it's motivational. Sometimes it's complete therapy for me. Sometimes it's just selfish. That's okay. You may be able to relate. But then at least once or twice a week, I have a long-form conversation with people who are smarter than I am about different topics. And usually those conversations can kind of go in different directions. That's why I love the formats, because we can take it different directions. So today is no different. I've got a friend of mine on the phone, dear friend, who's a mystery guest at this point because I've not introduced you. This is my first official phone interview. Trying new technology, trying to grow my brand. I hope you feel just completely honored as I welcome to the show the founder and CEO of Journey Beyond Divorce, a relationship and divorce coach that is known nationally, who is no stranger to podcast and video cast and all the other kind of cast you can do to make yourself known to the world. Karen McMahon, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Clint. I'm really excited to be here today.
Well, like I said, this is my first official podcast via phone. So my biggest fear is that I somehow hit a wrong button. The good thing is I have people that are also smarter than me over here making sure I don't do that. So I appreciate you taking the time. I know your schedule is very tight. So I introduced you as the founder and CEO of Journey Beyond Divorce. As much as you're comfortable with, how long has that been around, and what was the genesis for that organization?
Great question. So Journey Beyond Divorce has been around for about 8 years. I started in 2010, and I had become a certified life coach prior to that and had to decide what audience of people I would work with. And I had been in sales my whole life, and I thought, well, maybe I'll be a sales coach. But what I realized was life coaching is really about helping people through transition to get from where you are to where you want to be. Divorce is a devastating and overwhelming transition. I was a child of divorce. I went through a really difficult divorce. And I felt like, you know what? God has created me to support men and women navigating the dissolution of their marriage and divorce. And so that's a huge part of what I do. And the other thing that I do, which is like the other side of the same coin, is work with men and women who are mending their marriage and figuring out how to reconcile. And it's been just an incredible experience.
Have you found that when people call you originally, a lot of times they'll say, okay, I'm in a process of getting a divorce. I want a divorce. They want a divorce. Have you seen the transformation of somebody saying that or feeling that to the reconciliation? Does that happen often? Or when somebody calls you, have you found that they know what they want? I either want to reconcile already or I'm moving on.
Yeah, I would say the majority of people are already on the path.
Right.
And are heading toward divorce. I definitely have experienced people calling and saying, I actually recently had a woman call and say, you know, you came highly recommended. I want to divorce my husband. And as I listened to her describe her situation, I've just heard enough stories that I was able to say, it doesn't really sound like divorce is necessarily the right option. Would you be open to a conversation to explore reconciliation? And they ended up in a really short period of time reconciling and just being thrilled. I've had clients call. I had a client call a number of years ago, and she said, my husband wants a divorce, and so I want you to coach me through getting a divorce. And I said, well, do you? And she said, absolutely not. And this is something we'll dive into a little bit more. But what I say to everybody is, whether you're going to try and stay or you're going to go, being in this very prickly place is an incredible opportunity to work on yourself. And regardless of which path you ultimately take, you're going to be a healthier, stronger, better person for what we do between now and then.
I will use my background and my experience as much as I feel comfortable doing in reference. But when I called you, it was going through that experience of, hey, this is where life is taking me. It's uncharted waters. And I'm a little different, I guess. I say that, it may be good or bad. I'm a little different. I know that for a fact, but especially about...
We all know that.
Yeah. Well, but, you know, because I reached out for counseling almost immediately. And the reason I did that, and me and you have had this conversation a little bit, I think men sometimes tend to hesitate to ask for help, which always baffles me because life is so short. I want to be as healthy as I can, as quick as I can, and I want to learn how to navigate this pain as best I can. And you said some really good things to me, and then I'll bring that out here in just a minute. But have you experienced my anecdotal observation of guys just don't like to ask for help as much as we should?
You know, I had asked a business consultant of mine once, I said, is it because I have all women on my team, or is there something about my message that tends to lean feminine? Because many divorce coaches are women who only coach women. My team coaches both men and women, and yet we have a much smaller percentage. We're probably about a 70-30 with 30% men. And this business consultant who was in his 60s and had decades under his belt said, even as a business consultant doing small businesses up to like Fortune 1000, we have significantly more female clients than male clients. And so I don't like to make broad generalizations. And yet,
I'll do it.
The question does remain, is it, and that's what he said. He said, look, men are less comfortable acknowledging what they don't know and that they need the support, whereas his words, not mine, women tend to be more open to that. So that's one possibility.
Yeah, and I'll say it. I mean, I know you don't want to, but I will say it. The guys I have talked to, it's funny, I'll have a number of men, you know, since I've had this experience in my life, I'll talk to other guys and they're more comfortable starting to tell me about their problems, you know, their issues, or they're thinking about getting a divorce. And the first thing I say is, well, who have you talked to outside your friends? We can kind of start that part of the conversation now. One of the first things that when I spoke to you and a couple other buddies who had been through it, is when you start asking your friends for advice, sometimes that's not always the best thing. And that doesn't just go for getting a divorce or trying to reconcile a marriage. That can be in any relationship, whether it's business or not, unless they're qualified or unless they have a very good perspective, a big picture perspective. It's really asking them to give you almost confirmation bias. It's almost asking them, don't you agree with me? And most friends are going to.
And I think there's two things, especially with divorce. One is nobody's walked in your shoes. Nobody's lived your life. Nobody's been married to your spouse. And so when they start shoulding on you, and that's my term that I love, it's like, you should this and you should that. They're not coming from a place of understanding or knowing your needs, your passions, your fears, your obstacles. And so what coaching is, in a nutshell, is meeting someone where they are, asking them a lot of probing questions, more so that they hear their answers than I hear their answers, and trusting that they have all the answers inside of them. And what happens, especially in divorce, is when so many people are giving you their opinion, not only is it a very overwhelming and confusing time, but now you've got all of these conflicting pieces of advice coming at you,
right,
and it can bury you. And really what we do is say, let's just help you to peel your own onion back and get really comfortable with what's best for you, which only you know. And I think that has been so liberating for so many clients.
There's a couple of things that you said in our time together when we were on the phone, over the course of a few months. Being able to talk to somebody who has a perspective, they're not tied into you as a friend, and they're not, I know you care about people, you care about me, I'm on the phone with you, but it's also a freeing thing. I can say things, I don't have to worry about making you biased, I don't have to worry about you holding it over my head tomorrow if I do decide to reconcile, I don't have to worry about anything else other than getting it off my chest, and the perspective I get back from you, usually, at least in the conversations that I had, sometimes were some tough love comments of, yeah, let's talk about you though.
Yeah.
Let's change the focus, Clint. Because I told my kids, I've told my friends this, one of the things that I learned in that process, hearing you say stuff back to me, was everybody is a victim and a villain at some point in time in their life. It's silly to say that no one's a victim, and it's silly to say, at least in my opinion, that no one's a villain. There are times I've done stuff I'm not proud of. There are times I have been acted upon by other people, and one is not worse than the other, but the stuff that I can't control is what was drowning. You've got these waves, you got these waves of pain. You've got the disappointment in your inability to finish what you started. You've got the pain of your children, the disappointment of your friends, your parents. And more importantly, you start questioning yourself as a partner or as somebody worth value, because so much of your value is in that relationship. Now I got my friends telling me stuff. It was nice to hear somebody else's perspective saying, hey, why don't you quit being so complicated and focus on one thing, you?
Exactly. And I think that two things. One is when you're coaching with a good coach, you are experiencing total non-judgment. If I can't come to the table with cleansed, like pure of any judgment, then I can't do you a lot of good. Whereas your friends and your family who love you so much, she's wrong, you're wrong, this is good, that's bad, and it just doesn't help. And then that focus on the self is, that's the center of what we do. And you just, in between the lines of what you said, spoke to how powerless one feels when they're focused on how their ex should be different, or how the system should work differently, or how their children should, that they wish they would handle it. And it's like you're powerless because you have all this focus on things you have no control over. And when you bring that control and that focus back to the one place where you can impact a change, you become empowered. And in the process of divorce, which is so filled with uncertainty and that feeling of being out of control, keeping the focus on yourself is so grounding and again, empowering.
Well, you start asking yourself so many questions there's no way you're going to have answers to. None. I found myself all the time asking, what if, did this, did they, did I, could we, could, and it was a never-ending Pez dispenser of questions that I had no ability to answer. And so hearing you telling me to change my inner voice, those conversations that really got me focused on inner voice over the last 2 years, I've done separate podcasts on those. And because I never really paid attention to how I was talking to myself. The first time you and I spoke, I don't know if you'll remember it, and I don't think you gave me an exact term, but you told me I had apologized and said, I'm sorry, dozens of times.
Yep.
It was a reflection on who I felt I was as a person. But when you have people calling you and they're in this emotional, turbulent waves are killing them, they're getting drowned, what's the first thing you start doing? How do you take somebody that's got the, as I call it, the snot crying, where you have no control because you're in heartbreak. And that, by the way, just so I'm clear, you were very good about pointing this out. Whether you're initiating the divorce or on the other end, it's heartbreaking both ways. It's not like one person's heart's broken and the other person's not. I was quick to acknowledge, and if you're healthy in the situation, both sides are going through heartbreak.
Yeah, and, I think that there is this assumption that if you've initiated the divorce, then it's easier for you. I was the initiator of my divorce, and I was heartbroken for years trying to reconcile. And then in the beginning stages, just that this was the only path left to me. And so everybody is heartbroken. And to your point, there's two different things. In the early stages, we approach a client from two different levels. One is the feelings. It's so important to acknowledge that it makes sense that you're overwhelmed. It makes sense that you feel like you're temporarily ADD, that you're not doing well at work, that you can't remember your tasks, that you're forgetting things you wouldn't typically forget because it's almost like you have such a large database running in the background that your day-to-day is glitching out. And so to really acknowledge and validate where somebody is and the impact it's just having on their ability to show up every day in their lives. And then the other thing is to, once we can get a client to begin looking in the mirror, focusing on themselves, there's the feeling your feelings, because a lot of people don't want to do that. So they work harder, or they stuff them, or they numb them, or they watch Netflix or whatever. And that vital piece, and I remember you going through this too, it's like you have to actually feel your feelings, and the best thing you can do is cry yourself a river, because in order to heal it, you have to first feel it. And for those who don't, it just comes out in their next relationship. You didn't feel any of your feelings. You went through your divorce. You find somebody else. And all of a sudden, you're super reactive when something happens because none of that old stuff was cleared out. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. I feel like I was almost lucky. I don't know if it's how I was built or just the timing of it, going into counseling so soon afterwards. And the reason is I think some of those things I've dealt with, and some of them are, some things you can heal and move on. And then some things are just like working out or taking showers you have to do consistently. You have to make habits on how you talk to yourself. You have to make habits on breathing, and that things come in waves, and it's going to come, and the waves get smaller, and just those type of things. It's almost 2 years into it, and the waves still come from time to time. You'll still hear a song or see a movie preview or drive by a restaurant. Those kind of things are normal. I think one of the things that helped me talking to you was I didn't feel alone in the process, because you said it a minute ago. Your pain is unique. 1 million people can go through the same situation, but your pain is unique to you. And it's easy to feel like you're all by yourself in this big room with nothing but feelings that are all attacking you. And it's easy to feel by yourself.
Absolutely. And especially, when you're dealing with divorce, it's like most of us are in a circle of friends who are married. So all of a sudden you're on the outs. It's like you don't have a partner. You may not have in-laws anymore if they react to you. Your friends feel awkward and they're trying to figure out, do I invite them both to the party? Do I not invite anyone? Do I call them? How awkward do I feel? How many people have experienced friends who feel so awkward with your pain that they avoid you, or they tell you to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, go out and meet a girl and have a good night, or all of these things, and it doesn't help. And so really meeting you where you're at, and every single person is at a different place, and the only way I can meet someone where they're at is if I have no agenda of my own, no judgment of my own, and I just hear them, and I just keep helping them to see themselves. And what you're saying, I think what our goal and our desire is that every client who emerges from coaching is so much more conscious of how they show up in the world and intentional about how they want to be in all of their relationships. And so the skills and tools and conversations that we have aren't just meant to help one through divorce. It's to help one be a better parent, to engage in new relationships and business relationships, in every relationship in a much healthier way.
Yeah, and you said something right there about how you show up, and I want to not, I guess tease is the wrong word, but I want to make sure I talk about a couple of the phrases that you used, and I've already said a few of them, but showing up was one you used a couple of times and used it in two different ways. One, I kept saying, I was talking about my ex, and then I would talk about me, and then I would talk about my ex, and you said, hey, quit expecting your partner to show up differently than they've been showing up, and start focusing on why you or how you were showing up. Because, again, that is what you can control. So showing up was a theme that I heard quite a bit through you and I conversations, and the ability to accept the fact that they are who they are, I am who I am, but I cannot make them something that I really want. That
is one of the most powerful ahas for everybody.
And when you said it, it was like that for me when you said it.
Yeah, and it's like if if your spouse shows up as a giraffe for 15 years, they're not going to wake up and be a zebra tomorrow. They're actually going to be the same. And we have clients who go, I can't believe. Well, how long have they been doing that for? For 20 years. Well, then why can't you believe it? And and we point out the resistance. And it's like, you're resisting. You want this person to be different. Your resistance doesn't make them different. It just makes you suffer more while they continue to be them. And by the way, how are you showing up? And why is it that you have allowed or accepted or reacted the way you have? Can we stay on that side of the lane? Because that's where all the treasures are.
That's where the healing takes place. And the showing up part of it was, like I said, that was one of my aha moments when we were talking, because the image we create of being in love usually is vastly different than the reality of being in love, especially when you get married, and you said it best, and everybody knows it, but it's almost like what we know is so different than what we really live. This image of love and romance is awesome, but if you don't temper that with their mess ups and my mess ups and their faults and my faults, and really try to learn to be healthy, I think sometimes when we get married, and I'll speak to myself, sometimes when you get married, or when I got married, I kind of was content, and I stopped realizing that I was supposed to grow as an individual, not just as a husband and not just as a father. I was supposed to grow as an individual, and I was trying to live in a world that was 20 years later with the same skill set I had when I got married, which didn't work because everybody around me had changed.
And I think one of the keys to getting there is we're all raised, and there's this, it's not fair, and it's her fault, or it's his fault. And so this kind of, when I feel pain, emotional pain, it has to be because of someone or something else. And so it's the circumstance's fault or the other person's fault. And you lose the opportunity, because when you say, I'm uncomfortable, I'm feeling pain, what is my trigger, right? We used to talk about this all the time. What's my trigger? What's my tender underbelly? What's my unforgiveness or my brokenness or my insecurity or my limiting beliefs that have me so triggered by a situation or a person's words? And now I'm not blaming and accusing them. There's a saying, like, they're the messenger. Don't shoot the messenger. Let them go, just like you let the postman go after he drops off the mail, and get the message. Open up the mail. What's the trigger? What am I to learn? And one of the things I love saying to people is, when someone pushes your button, if you let them go and say, what's the button precedes the relationship with the person who pushed it. Now you're in this beautiful realm of what's going on with me, and how do I refine myself or heal myself so that I'm no longer triggered and reactive in this way. You do that with each and every one of your triggers, and you're going to live in peace and joy in most of your relationships, regardless of how the other person shows up, which is brilliant.
And it will, at least through what I'm learning, it'll affect how you deal with your employees, your employer, your business partners, your sisters, your brothers, your friends, because the art of being aware of your triggers and the art of realizing listening to listen and not listening to respond, the things that you and I discussed, those, and it doesn't mean you're perfect just because you're working on them, but that habit of being self-aware is a universal skill that you can take anywhere. And it's modeling. It's something your kids can see. And it's something that you almost, when I go work out, I always feel good. But when I find myself in the middle of a conversation, whether it's a business partner, my ex-wife, a child, something anywhere in the world, if I find myself intentionally controlling what I'm doing, I feel very, it's going to sound self-grandizing, but I feel proud that I've taken that skill and I'm putting it into practice in that moment. That's hard to get to. And I don't do it enough, but it's a hard skill set to learn.
Right. And we're all works in progress. Anyone who says they've arrived is deluding themselves, right? Like, this is our walk while
Right.
we're on this earth. If we use every opportunity, every upset to heal and refine ourselves, then we become better and better people. And if you, the listeners, think about the people in your life that you're drawn to, I guarantee they live in acceptance, first of all. They accept people for how they show up, set boundaries when they have to, but accept. And they have a higher emotional energy. They have an energy that is magnetic and draws you to them because there's not blaming and accusation. There's not conflict and frustration and victim mentality. There is this sense of, I'm accepting, I can create win-wins, I can enjoy everyone for who they are and how they are, and I can just totally keep the focus on myself. Those are those magnetic people in your life, and they're so successful. And the reason they're so successful is everything we're talking about, Clint, falls under the category of emotional intelligence. And if you've ever done any research on emotional intelligence trumps your intellect, your IQ, 8 days a week in terms of success. You're going to be more successful in any business, in any corporation, in any personal relationship when you increase your emotional intelligence, which is understanding what triggers you and how to manage it, and understanding how to read other people and how to manage those relationships.
And nothing's worse than when you know you've let yourself down and you walk out of a conversation going, well, good job, Clint. Way to go on that one, buddy. You know, maybe I should go read the book again. I'm calling Karen. That's it. Dadgummit. So, hey, listen, there's a few quick things I want to touch on that deal with kind of not life after divorce, but after the event. One was that, and you mentioned it a little earlier, is friends. And the reason I want to bring this up is, you know, you never know where, when people listen, they could be in different stages. They could have just found out they're getting a divorce, be a year into it or 3 years into it. But one of the things that I learned pretty quick was that it doesn't really matter how close friends are. Once the divorce has kind of gone through, sometimes, and again, this is not a blame. I completely understand, and there is no animosity. But sometimes friends do have to take, not a side, but they have to go, listen, this relationship was one that was a little more important. I've got to kind of pull back. It doesn't mean they don't care. It doesn't mean they won't check on you from time to time. But it's another place that if we don't keep focusing on ourselves, I think we can get stuck being bitter towards people who have been they're in a tough spot too, and trying to make that work.
Yeah, I think that the best rule is don't take other people's behavior personally.
Right.
So whether it's your ex or soon-to-be ex doing something that doesn't work for you, you set your boundaries and you don't ruminate about what they're doing and why they're doing it and how they're doing it. They're doing it. That's on them. And if you have a group of friends, and some of them might be too nosy, and some of them might run away, and some of them, might do something else. When we don't take the rest of the world personally, life is just so much easier because, again, everyone comes with their baggage and their judgments and everything else. And so that's on them. It's not on you.
And you don't know why they're making that decision.
And it doesn't matter. The why actually doesn't matter. It's like, you're choosing that. I can share how I feel about it.
Right.
But once I start ruminating or trying to control you or change you or blame you for how I feel, like, this is one of the things that makes me chuckle. You're making me feel bad. And I'm like, nobody can make you feel anything. Nobody's a puppeteer of you.
Are you sure?
If you feel bad, take a look at why you feel bad.
Can we change that one? Can we make it? It's much easier if I can just blame somebody else.
Yeah, it's actually not very easy when we blame someone else, but I think that is the overall belief is, it's his fault or her fault. And when we say, I'm upset, what got me here?
Right.
My son had once got really upset and he started cursing at me, and I was like, you are so disrespectful. And he looked at me shocked. And he's like, Mom, I respect you more than any other person on the face of the earth. Like, why would you say that? And I realized I was being triggered by some of my own stuff. And of course, I don't want you using that language, but my interpretation that dropping an F-bomb meant he disrespected me was my stuff. And when I was able to work through that, him and I were able to have very different conversations and navigate differences in a much healthier way.
That's a great story, though, to show the example of sometimes it's, most of the time it's not about them. It's all about you, even when it's friends or exes. And, the other thing I was going to bring up, because I did ask you a little bit of advice, is the co-parenting aspect. And I know we don't want to spend too much time on it, but you can give advice, you can give some tips, or you can just give your observations on the struggles, because now you've got to go from this relationship that was very intimate, and now you feel like you don't know that person anymore. But if you have children involved, it's not healthy for them to see that part of it.
Yeah, and so I think that there's two things. There's co-parenting and there's parallel parenting. And the vast majority of people are in a position where they can co-parent, which is to really collaborate with your ex and not to pit each other against each other or take sides with the children. And I think that the most important thing is open communication and don't sweat the small stuff. What happens so often is people get divorced and then their co-parenting dance is exactly like their marriage dance. And it's like, well, you got divorced, but nothing else has changed. You're just living under two different roofs having the same arguments and resisting how the other person shows up. And so if you know that you have an ex that has certain behaviors, don't expect them to be different after the divorce. Rather, create your collaboration based on how they actually behave, not how you wish they behave or how you think they should change their behavior. And then, keeping the kids front and center, just constantly communicating clearly with the children. And in communicating with your ex, there's a term, it's called BIF, which is brief, informative, firm, and friendly.
Oh, I like that.
Rather than accusing and blaming and getting reactive, you keep your response brief, you keep it informative, you keep it firm, this is my decision, and you keep it friendly, no bad words, no nastiness, and then you end it. And that's like an incredible guideline to use to be able to co-parent with your ex. And just one thing on the parallel parenting, yes. I happen to be in a parallel parenting situation. If you're divorcing somebody who has a personality disorder or is an active addict or alcoholic, or an abuser, collaborating with co-parenting may not be possible. And it doesn't make you bad that you can't collaborate if the other person has those issues. And in that case, you focus on your children. So if mom or dad does something distasteful or hurtful toward the kids, you don't make it about mom or dad. You talk to your kids. How do you feel? You acknowledge them. What are your options? What can you say back to that parent? How can you set a boundary? What did you learn about yourself? And so through what is such a painful time, when you're in that kind of a high conflict situation, your children are actually growing every time something difficult happens because you're pouring into them healthy responses. Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. And in the last year and a half or 2 years since my divorce, and I'm lucky, I'll say this out loud, I'm lucky, my ex and I have a great co-parenting relationship. She's a good mother. So our children's well-being has never been a concern for either one of us. We know that we have their best interest at heart. But I've watched my kids, and I guess I can use a specific example. A couple months ago, I was in a conversation with my daughter. We were talking about something, and she got kind of teary-eyed because of the topic. And I looked, and I realized that when we were talking about something had triggered her. I guess it was a memory of maybe family time during the summer or whatever it was. But it was a good opportunity for me to say, first of all, hey, I forgot that is, even though I may have been able to deal with that, you may not have. I may not should have talked about it. And second of all, are you okay? And she and I, and of course me and my son too, I've been very fortunate. We've had a very good relationship. They've always been open. But it was, again, one of those moments where I think it was healthy for them to hear dad say, sometimes I'm sorry to you too. I'm upset about things too. It's okay for them to see you going through the emotions. That's the other thing. I think there's a fine line between being too emotional and not having any emotions about it, because then either way, the kids feel like you can't relate to them. And I tried to deal with that with you a little bit.
That is such an important point. I grew up with a mom who didn't show any feelings. And so we went through the divorce, and except for her being angry, there was nothing else. There were never any tears shed. And so it wasn't until I was an adult that we started having conversations, and I got a sense of what a difficult, painful time it was for her.
Right.
On the other hand, I've had a client whose spouse would lay his head on the kid's lap and cry hysterically, and mommy's breaking our heart, and that's terrible, right? And so you don't want to burden your children with that, but you do want to show up as a real human being. And I'm having a hard time, and you caught me crying, and I'm struggling with something. It's like, that's real. We need to show up real for our kids. And like you said, if we don't, then they're going to start judging their own emotions as wrong or bad, which would be terrible.
And how are they going to feel comfortable saying, I'm sad, Dad, if they don't think you're sad? Because then all of a sudden you don't relate to me. I can tell by the way you're acting. Right. So I wanted to talk about that. And then the last two quick things is, and it's not too quick, but that universal voice that we hear. I learned this, and I'm sure you know it, but a lot of times we hear the voice in our head that's very critical of us. It tells us what we're not good at, and it reminds us of our failures. And somebody said this the other day, that voice, those voices, those doubts, those are universal across time and every person that's ever lived. We just feel they're unique to us because we hear all those things in our voice. And I think it's very important you had mentioned this after we had talked 4 or 5 times about how important it was for me to take quiet time and breathe and really focus on being aware of the things that I'm saying to myself in moments.
Yeah, first of all, in general, our thoughts are so powerful. So everything starts with our thoughts. So you have a thought, and it either triggers you to be happy or sad or angry or whatever the emotion is. And then whatever that emotion is hardwired into how you act. And so, for instance, when you're feeling like a victim, if it's like, I'm screwed and she's going to take me for all I have, or I'm going to be alone for the rest of my life, how do I feel? I feel miserable. What do? I don't want to do anything. I want to crawl into the covers. And so our thoughts directly tie into our feelings, and our feelings are hardwired into our actions. Now you take that inner voice, and most of the time, one of the questions I'll ask clients a lot of time is, whose voice is that? Because a lot of times that inner critic dates all the way back to our childhood. And it could be that my mom used to say to me, stop being so sensitive. That stayed with me. And then I'd be like, what am I being so sensitive for? Let me just buck up, like that kind of a thing. And so when you start noticing, what are these statements and these beliefs that are running through my head? And just because they've been implanted doesn't mean they're mine. Do I believe this? And if I don't believe it, if I don't believe I'm so sensitive, if I believe that I'm just a normal, healthy, sensitive person, then let me change my story. Let me start being conscious and noticing what I'm thinking and what I'm saying to myself, and let me rewrite my narrative if it's not serving me. And so what that does is it allows us to create all this positive self-talk. And if our thoughts affect our feelings and our feelings affect our actions, what happens when all of your self-talk is positive? It has this huge ripple effect. And to come out of relationship and divorce for a minute, because you and I have talked about business, and I've been in business my whole life,
right.
When you're going into a business meeting or an interview or a pitch or closing a sale, pay attention to what's being said in your head, because you can be dressed to the nines, you could be all polished, you could have the best PowerPoint, and if you're going, oh my God, the economy's so bad, and the competition's cheaper, and blah, 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 you're not going to go in there and do your best. Your self-talk has to be, I've got something special, I'm really good at what I do, my product is this, and that makes all the difference in the world. Same thing if you're going out dating or anything else. That self-talk is going to drive the outcome of that interaction.
You were talking about the inner voice, and I've tried to find, I believe in telling stories, and I try to find ways to explain things to me to where I understand them, and sometimes it helps other people. I found it's almost like when you're reading a book. If you read a book, even if it's silently or out loud, you hear it in your voice, but it's not your words. And sometimes my inner voice, I started to acknowledge that's my voice, because that's when I read something, I hear my voice. Of course, it's my voice, but that's not necessarily the script that I wrote. I'm reading someone else's book in my words. So if I were reading someone else's book, I would never assume I wrote that book. I almost had to adopt that mindset on my inner voice, if that makes sense.
Exactly. And that's exactly what happens. There's a book I often recommend, which is called Conscious Loving. It's a journey to co-commitment and a co-independent relationship. And it's a husband and wife psychologist team, and they literally tell story about couple after couple. And one of the things that's fascinating about it is that I come from my family of origin, and I have my experience of how my mom and dad interacted. And then my husband comes along, and he has his. And we've each been blueprinted by that. Like in the first 7 years of our lives, we've been blueprinted. So if you're coming from yelling and screaming or mistrust and infidelity or whatever it is, and what happens is we literally connect perfectly to each other in our unhealthiness and begin to replay that script over and over again. And what I said earlier is our goal is for people to be conscious and intentional. And when you go through this coaching process, and like you're saying, you start noticing those aren't my words, that's not my belief, let me rewrite it, or I'm living in regret of yesterday or worry of tomorrow, let me stay in the present moment. All of a sudden, you're living a more conscious and intentional life, and it changes everything.
I told somebody the other day, if I was going to have a superpower, it would be overthinking. That would be my only superpower, is I overthink everything. I'm going to get a cape with that. And before I ask you this final question, I wanted to say something. We did talk a lot about focusing on yourself, and I'm going to be really clear. You're someone else's X2. In other words, if you've been through the divorce and you can spend a lot of your time sorting through things, when you start really focusing on yourself, you become very conscious that I also impacted the other person. Whether I initiated the divorce or not, that is a very healing moment too, when you realize, you know what, they probably are having these conversations about my behavior and about how I impacted their lives too. And once you do that, I think it's easier to extend mercy and grace, because that's exactly what we need. You know, if you don't extend it and you just want it, then that becomes a selfish person. So that's one of the things talking with you help. There are people listening right now, they may have just found out yesterday, they may be 6 months into the process, they may be a year after. One of the words that I think that helped me the most, it's overplayed and everybody talks about it, but it's this small little word called hope. It's just, everybody talks about hope, everybody wants hope, but there is hope. And that's why you have the name of it is Journey Beyond Divorce, because there is a huge, healthy life after this moment. What do you say to those people who in the moment right now feel hopeless?
So many people come to us and they do feel hopeless. And I think that the first thing is it's through crisis and trauma that we actually always become our best selves. And I can say to someone, I was actually just yesterday, I had a new client here, and I said, I know you don't believe this, and I have just experienced this hundreds, if not thousands of times. If you do this work, you will be so crazy about who you are and how you feel about your life when you emerge on the other side. And it's going to be hard. It's going to suck. But do the work, and through it, the most incredible gift comes, which is the gift of us being healthier and clearer and more confident and better in all of our relationships. And a lot of times people will say, you know what, I can't see it, I can't feel it, I can't imagine it, but you're so convincing, I'm going to believe you. That's going to be my lifeline for right now.
Right.
And that often happens. And then it doesn't take long, because coaching is all about taking action steps and moving forward. It's so different from talk therapy, where you talk and leave and come back and talk some more. People very quickly start seeing. I had a client come Friday for the first time, and then last night, and she was like, I already feel the elephant beginning to step off my chest, and it's only been 3 days, and it's only because I did these 2 little action steps. And so people can step into that hope pretty quickly with coaching, because it's so strategic and action-oriented. And
that goes to everything in life. Sometimes when we're not in shape, we feel like it's overwhelmed. Well, I got to eat, less carbs, more carbs, no eggs, all eggs. I've got to go work out.
Yep.
And so we just don't do anything. But when it comes to our relationships, if it's that way, that affects our mental health, which affects our physical health. So if we have a plan, us creatures love having plans. We love having to-do lists. The problem with it is we never put things for us really on our to-do list. Usually it's for other people. The reason I wanted to have a podcast with you, one of the reasons, and I want to have another one soon, and especially since I figured out how to push buttons and do phone stuff, which is good. But it's because I found you on a podcast. I was searching. When you're going through pain, just like going to the doctor, you get a diagnosis, you start searching for things. And I found you on a podcast, and you were talking, and I heard probably 6 or 7 of podcasts you had done, and the things that you were saying related to exactly where I was. Yes, I feel that way. No, there's no hope, but you're telling me that. And it related. So my hope is that somebody that listens to this either now or as we grow the podcast, in 6 months they may find it out there on the great World Wide Web, is that they'll hear a couple of things that, the light bulb will go off. There's 2 people who have been through this. There's hope, there's health, there's happiness, and they'll start the process. And my hope is they, and I say this, I don't think you would mind it because you care about people. I would like for you to call Karen and her team and find out if it's a good fit for you. But if that's not something you can do or want to do, don't sit where you're at. Get help from somewhere, because sitting where you're at will get you nowhere.
That's right. And there's a lot of information out there. And there are some people who will stoke your victim mentality, and there are other people who will really kind of challenge you like we do. And so there's a lot of information. Find the information that resonates with you and keep the focus on yourself, I think would be the key thing I would say. If I can, I'd love to share 3 resources that we have.
I was getting ready to ask you to tell me about how they find out how to get the help you offer. So feel free, please.
Yeah, so our site is jbddivorcesupport.com, the JBD standing for Journey Beyond Divorce. So jbddivorcesupport.com. And when you go on the home page, there's a free divorce survival kit that gets you started right away with a couple of tips to immediately get you moving in the right direction. There's an ebook that's just $4.99. It's called Stepping Out of Chaos, and it takes you through the key steps of becoming aware, stepping into acceptance, and then starting to act that will move you through. And then we have an online divorce support platform, which offers all of our podcasts, our videos, our ebooks, our webinars, plus a private Facebook group. And so it's just like all-encompassing. It gives you support on the emotional level. It gives you all the guidance on the logistics. And then it gives you this community of people who are in a similar situation and can really empathize and support you. And we have a trial month for that. So all of that's at jbddivorcesupport.com if you're interested in learning a little bit more about what we offer.
I'll wrap this up and then say thank you, because I'm going to do the 3 things that I found, and you're going to like especially the third one. The one thing that I found is get out and go walk, get some sun, get some vitamin D, get active, go do something that gets your body physically challenged. You don't have to run a marathon, but stay active. It releases hormones. It's helpful. The second thing is, and I started doing this pretty quickly, you got to start your day off saying 2 or 3 things you're thankful for. It's really easy when you get stuck to realize how bad things are. Force yourself, make a list at night, so when you get up in the morning, it hits you in the face. I've got great kids. I've got a good job. I live in a good place. I've got my health. Whatever it is, you make your list. And the third thing is get coaching. Because that's what I did, and I reached out to you. And so I think that component of having someone like you or your team involved is almost the difference from, it's not the fact that you may not heal, but that time that you saved me with your tips, being able to look outside. And I just want to take a chance now publicly, and whoever listens, to say thank you for investing the time. And I know there was a monetary investment on my end, but there was times that you spent with me that was unnecessary, and you went above and beyond. And I could tell that you care about the people you work with. So I just wanted to say thank you personally for the help you gave me, and I fully endorse someone calling you and your team to work with you.
Well, thanks, Clint, and you are very welcome. And it really is, for me, it's such an honor to come alongside people when they show up at their most broken, and then when they emerge, they're just so excited about their life. I mean, it's such a blessing to be able to do that.
Well, I'm glad I ran into you on the internet. Thank you for doing all those other podcasts so I could find them, and I appreciate you doing this one today as well. So let's just make an agreement that maybe we'll do 3 or 4 of these a year, and just every couple of months we'll touch base, and we can maybe, because a lot of new people will be coming on board, and we'll just touch new topics.
I think that sounds great. I would love to. And thank you so much for inviting me today. This was really wonderful.
No problem. Thank you very much. You've been listening to During the Break podcast, and we will see you next time. Thank you. Thanks for listening to During the Break. If you have any questions or suggestions, shoot me an email at clint@connectchattanooga.com. That's clint@connectchattanooga.com. Or you can private message me on our Facebook page. When we get started, it would be extremely helpful if you could rate and review the podcast on iTunes. That will help us get more listeners. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast, share it with your friends, and look for the next episode every Friday at 11 a.m.